Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Transit Lounge. Today, I have got an amazing guest, Carol Cooke, who has an Order of Australian medal and is a 5 times Paralympian, and she's also a world champion in cycling. Carol was born and bred in Toronto, Canada, where she fulfilled a lifelong dream of following in the footsteps of her family and several members of her family, and served as a member of the Toronto Police Force in Canada for 14 years. After competing in Hobart at the Masters Swimming Nationals in 1998, she awoke one morning with disturbing balance problems and double vision. Another all too common symptom of multiple sclerosis was rearing its ugly head. Having only been married for 3 years and no immediate family around, her thoughts revolved around how she was going to cope with this unpredictable disease. Although Carol had to leave full-time employment, she found another passion to keep her busy. Carol started the 24-hour mega swim in 2001 and now 15 years later has 17 swims running in Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT. Welcome to the program, Carol.
Thanks, Bill. It's good to be here.
It is a pretty impressive bio that I've got in front of me, and I didn't read more than about a third of it or a quarter of it. Tell me a little bit about yourself and growing up in Canada, which, by the way, sounds like an awesome place to grow up.
Yeah, look, it was bloody cold in the winter. I don't miss that, but look, life was great. I'm from a family of just two girls, and we grew up in suburban Toronto, quite far into the East End. It was a brand new area that was being built that my mom and dad bought in. And look, it was a normal childhood. My parents bought a cottage up in Northern Ontario. So the end of June, when school let out, we were up in the bush on a lake for 2 months, barefoot and running around in bathing suits all summer. And about 4 days before school started, we'd be back in the city getting ready for school. So, it was fantastic to have that chance to spend it on a lake. So learned to swim and water ski, and we just run nuts, because we could. There was nowhere to really get into trouble. And yeah, I guess as a little kid, just grew up doing all the things little kids do. And mom had us in dance lessons, and I got right into gymnastics, and then thought that at the age of 9, this would be great. My best friend and I, we loved gymnastics, and we were going to try out for an elite gymnastics club. So when we did, unfortunately, I didn't make it in, but my girlfriend did, and they weren't very nice. They said, "Oh, you're too fat for gymnastics." So I'm lucky I've got parents that made me realize that I could question things. And they just said, well, just try something different. So I started swimming, and then swimming became my life and my sport. And that was my goal, was the 1980 Olympics in Moscow. And unfortunately, Canada boycotted those games along with the US and most of the Western world, other than about, I think, Great Britain and Australia. So, so that's when that dream died. And I went and decided to get a real job and join the police force.
Yeah, fair enough. And what a real job that is.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You know what I'm curious to understand is a little kid wakes up one day, goes to try out for gymnastics because it'll be fun, gets rejected, for lack of a better word, by people who obviously didn't know who they were dealing with, and probably missed out on a world champion, gymnast of some sort.
Oh, look, now, because looking at my body, I'm definitely not a gymnast build. So, they could have probably put it a bit differently.
Okay.
But yeah, I definitely was not a gymnast build, and I never would have got to any level. There's just no way. But I was built the right build as a swimmer. So, that's and we because we had the cottage, we grew up around water, and we
Mm.
learned. Mom and dad had us in swimming lessons, and I remember dad throwing me off the end of the dock one day and just said, "Swim back." So you do.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was it
Sink
was
or
one way
swim.
to learn how to swim. So yeah, so I have no qualms about them saying that no, I wouldn't be a gymnast, but it's just might have been the way they handled it might have been a bit different.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. So, what happened? Did you take on swimming and then straight away, as a young kid, decide you were going to try out for the Olympics? How did you get to, going and having some fun swimming and then deciding I'm going to try out for the Olympics?
Well, I guess it was probably in 1976 when the Olympics were in Canada. They were the 1976 Montreal Olympics. And I was swimming at just a junior national level at that point. And everything, it was all about the swimming during the Olympics. And I think I cut, as a matter of fact, the other day, we decided to do a big clean out of our house. And I opened up a trunk that I had sent here from Canada when I moved here 22 years ago. And I found in this trunk, God, I'm a pack rat. I found a folder, and it had all the articles that I had cut out of the paper from the 1976 Olympics
Wow.
about the swimming that I had posted on, I had taped on my wall of my bedroom. And I still had them. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. So I sat, here I'm supposed to be pulling crap out and throwing it away. And I sat there for an hour just going through all this stuff. Everything was yellowed, and
Mm.
the type wasn't holding anymore in this book. And so I just went through everything and went, yep, geez, I really was into it. And
And
it was from there that I just went, yeah, I'm going to do this.
right, okay. So you tried out for the Olympics and then Canada boycotted. And then what
Mm.
happened to the dream of swimming in the Olympics?
Well, see, back then, I was about 18 at the time, and in swimming back, we're talking, 1979, 1980. If you hadn't made it as a swimmer by the age of 15, 16, you were pretty much washed up. I
Right.
mean, thoughts have changed now around women in sport, and now we realize that women don't hit their peak strength until they're into their late 20s, even early 30s. And in fact, in 2008 in Beijing, they had a woman, Dara Torres from the US, who was 42 years old and swam at the Olympic Games in the sprint events. And I think she went home with 3 silver medals. So we've now learned that, yeah, you're certainly not as a woman at your peak at the age of 18. Back then, that wasn't it. The most of the world record holders were in their teens, mid to just 18 type thing.
Yeah, and you're certainly not washed up by 19, right?
Oh God, I'm 54 now and I'm still not washed up. I'm proving them all wrong.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you decided to become a police officer. Were you
Yeah.
one of those really cool Mountie kind of police officers with the red outfit and all that? Because when I think of Canadian police, that's all I think of.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, the Mounties are like the federal police here in Australia. So most of the red tunic that they wear, their red serge is a dress uniform. So most of the time they're just in a normal old blue uniform. They patrol the airports, and they do a lot of the small towns throughout Canada, and obviously a lot of the federal stuff. So no, I was with a city force, the Toronto Police Force, which is probably, well, it is the biggest city force in the country. And I think at the time when I was on the job, there was probably about 5,500 officers just for the city of Toronto. And yeah, my mom and dad had both been members. That's how they actually met. And my dad's father had been a police officer, and he joined before World War II. He was a police officer, and he trained all the police horses because he had race horses himself. And when he went to war, he lost his leg, my grandfather, but they still took him back on the police force when he came back because of losing his leg. And so, he was working in the telecommunication area. And yeah, so my dad joined, and my grandfather's brother was on, and I had two cousins on. And then mum was the 14th woman ever hired on the Toronto Police Force. But mind you, back in the late 50s, I think it was around 56, 57 that mum joined the police force. And they didn't do a lot of policing per se. They worked with young people, as they were known back then, the youth of the day. I don't think the youth of the day today are like the youth of the day back then.
Uh-huh.
And they did a lot of directing traffic. So, there wasn't that, nitty gritty type of policing for women back then. But in saying that, when they got married, the police force wouldn't let you have man and wife on the force because they were worried that the woman might just get too upset if something had happened to her man. So one of them had to leave, and so mum had been a teacher previously, so she left. So yeah, I think between all of us, we had about 85 years on the Toronto Police Force total. So
Wow.
yeah.
Those pesky women not being able to swim past 19 and deal with their man.
Oh, seriously, I know. Thank God we've moved on from there.
That's hilarious and sad at the same time, but we can look back and have a bit of a laugh. So it was really a family affair, this whole police force thing.
Yeah, most of the family. My sister, well, she was the rebel. She became a journalist. Sunday dinners were interesting when I'd come home for dinner, and Dad and I would not say a word about work because Cindy was always looking for a good story.
That's
there wasn't
hilarious.
much talk about work at the table. And if there
Wow,
was, it was done surreptitiously.
that's hilarious. Now I'm thinking though, my heart's going out to your amazing Aussie husband. How in the hell did he break into a family full of cops and was he able to convince them that he was the man for you?
Well, that's interesting. Now, I ended up in Australia because of the World Police and Fire Games, the very first games, which were in California in 1985. And I was the only swimmer from the Toronto Police Force. And there was one swimmer from the Melbourne Fire Brigade. And the rest of the forces had multiples, they had teams. So this guy Graham Spivey and we kind of met up on the pool deck and went, yeah, let's stick together. And he invited me back to Aussie barbecue. They were staying at the university, and it was in San Jose in California. And I said, oh, okay, I'll come back. And met firefighters and their wives from Melbourne. And there was one couple there, almost the same age as my mom and dad, and they had a business card, and they said, oh, if you ever want to come to Australia, give us a call. I think they said that to about 3,000 other people, but don't invite me anywhere because I always show up. So I got home and thought, wow, I've always wanted to go to Australia. Maybe I'll do that. And so about 6 months later, I rang them. I had booked a flight already, but I rang them and I said, hi. I don't know if you remember me, but you met me at the games and you said I could come visit. So I've booked a flight. I hope that's okay. And they're like, oh, sure. I think I was the only one that took them up on their offer.
Wow.
Well, they became like second parents to me. And I'm still in touch with them to this day, even though they've split up. Margot's my Aussie mum. And I'm still in touch with John. And so between 86 and 92, I actually flew down to Australia 9 times. It was because I fell in love with the country. So to be honest, I'm going to pretend I'm a really dumb blonde and say, I thought Australia was this little tiny island in the South Pacific. And when I was first coming down for my 3 weeks, I was going to see it all.
Mm.
And when I got here and realized how big it was, every year I came down to see a bit more. And it wasn't until 92, 93, no, hang on, 92, November 92, I took a year leave of absence from the police force, and I actually came down here to travel around for a year. Because at that point, I wasn't really sure I wanted to stay a police officer. I'd become a bit jaded by it all and just
Mm.
about had enough. And yeah, I drove 34,500 kilometers around the country. And I came back to Melbourne and I went to North Kew Football Club and I met my husband. Um, but by the time November rolled around again, that was August of 93. By the time November rolled around, I had to go home because I had no money left
Mm.
and go back to work. And yeah, I think the first time that Russ came to Canada was a couple months after I had left. And I think he was a bit overwhelmed by Dad questioning him about who the heck he was. But when we got married, I must say, because Russ's surname was Cooke, and mine was Banks. My maiden name was Banks. And my uncle was the MC at our wedding, and he came up with a great story because, James Cooke, who, landed in Australia, his chief botanist on the ship was Sir Joseph Banks.
Mm.
And because Australia was looked at as a penal colony, my uncle put all those three things together and said, well, Banks and Cooke, definitely had to get together. And because Russ was in Australia, he obviously was descended from convicts, and our family were all cops, so it was a marriage made in heaven. So but it's taken Russ knows a few of my idiosyncrasies because of the police force, and every time I'd go into a restaurant I had to sit with my back to the wall so I had a big view of everything in front of me. So he's kind of got me out of that a little bit by jumping into the seat he knows that I want to take.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so he's been good. There's been a bit of training of getting out of that cop mode in the last 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. It really is interesting to hear how two cultures come together, especially, from two different parts of the planet.
Oh yeah, especially being that far apart.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Good to hear that it all worked out well. And you got stuck into the sports when you got to Australia, right? You competed in the Hobart. What was that again? The
Yeah, I was still swimming. I was still competing as a masters swimmer. So yeah, we were down in it was in 1998, and we were down in Hobart. They had the Masters Nationals swimming championships there. And actually Russ had come to watch for the first time.
hmm,
So yeah, so that's where we were competing. We used to compete all over the place, but yeah, 98 they were in Hobart. And the it was really hot, which was surprising. They were having a heat wave and it was like 40 degrees in Hobart, and the
hmm.
pool had absolutely no air conditioning. And even though I was really fit, I swam like a rock. Like I just swam very, very badly, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I was getting really lethargic and very tired and fatigued. And when we got home, I said to us, "Oh, I feel like I've got the flu coming on." And I spent a couple days in bed, and then my balance started going and banging against walls, and yeah. But yeah, sport. I mean, coming to Australia, sport was coming to Melbourne, like as a sports fanatic, it was like, whoa. And because I met Russ at a local AFL club, I realized when I moved here that if I wanted to see him between February and October,
Hmm.
I actually had to get involved with football. He was the team manager for the North Kew Football Club. So, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, all day Saturday, man, he was gone. So I thought, what can I do at the club? And I started there in the canteen, which was not a good idea. I'm not real good with chips and hot dogs. And eventually became the head sports trainer. Took the sports trainer's course and ran around the field with the guys every Tuesday night, Thursday night, and all day Saturday. So I like to tell people it's a great job for a woman because it's the only place that my husband would let me be with 40 naked men in a room and he didn't care.
Wow.
So it was interesting.
Yeah, well, you were doing the right thing for the team, right? And
Well,
making sure that they
exactly.
performed.
And I mean, it was quite funny because, I'd spent 14 years on the police force and nothing fazed me.
Mm.
I spent 4 years working undercover on the job, and so nothing at all would faze me. And the guys would try it on. some of the jokes,
Yeah.
oh, Carol, I pulled a groin muscle. Could you rub it for me? And I'd just pull out the dinkum rub and go, yeah, jump up. Oh, no, it's feeling much better now, So,
Yeah,
yeah,
brilliant comeback there.
yeah. So it was fun.
Um, so you woke up that morning not feeling the best. You swam like a rock.
Yep. I
You,
just, yeah, I thought I had the flu. I
yeah,
really thought I had the flu, and it was, over the couple weeks I'd been to the doctor and my balance was off. I literally would fall down. I'm walking the dog and I'd fall down, and the doctor thought I had an inner ear infection, which made sense,
hmm,
because I was a swimmer, and because of the balance. But we tried everything, Stematol, and then he had a CAT scan done and nothing showed up,
hmm,
and we were kind of wow. And then my eyesight started to go, and I went to just a local optometrist in the city at Merrington's, and walked in there, and she did. I told her my doctor thinks I have an inner ear infection, but I'm seeing double. My eyes feel like they're shaking. And so I thought I'd better come and have an eye test. And so she did a field vision test, and I failed it dramatically. I had no peripheral vision whatsoever. So the only thing I was seeing was dead center. And she had just graduated from university. And it was interesting because she's just a young girl, and she'd only been working for, I think, a couple months. And she said to me when I finished this test, she says, "Look, that wasn't very good. You haven't done very well at all. But you said you had an inner ear infection." I said, "Well, that's what the doctor thinks." And she said, "Well, maybe the infection spread to the optic nerve. Do you mind if I get your doctor's name and phone number and I'll give him a call?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And and she said, "And then go make an appointment, go back and see him." And so I left, and I went back to see the doctor, and she actually called him and said, "She's got optic neuritis, and that's a precursor for MS, so have her tested for MS." And he just went, "Whoa, I didn't even think of that."
wow.
You know. So because she had just graduated, that was just really in front of her, And as my doctor said to me, he said, "Look, we learn 20 minutes on every disease as a GP, and that's about it."
Yeah.
He said, so she obviously remembered what optic neuritis, what some of the things that could cause optic neuritis were. And
Mm.
that's, yeah. So, and so we found the first neurologist, which was another mistake that I could get into. And he was probably, 70 something and should have been retired. But, I went to see him, and he took all the details of me, and then ordered an MRI. And so I had my MRI, and I was going back to see him, and it's, weeks have gone by now, and I'm finally, my symptoms are gone. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a waste of time because it must have been the ear infection. And, I get there, and he's in a hurry, and he ushers me in to his office, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm wasting his time. My husband Russ, he went to work. I said, "Don't bother coming because it's gone,
Mm.
and there's nothing wrong." And as he makes me sit down, really in a hurry, he says, "Look," he says, he pulled out the film and he held it to the ceiling light, and he says, "Yeah, there's too many lesions on your brain for someone your age. So basically, your life as you know it's over. You've got MS, and I'd suggest you go home and put your affairs in order before you become incapacitated."
Oh God.
And I was just sitting there, and I swear my chin hit the floor. It was like being hit by a Mack truck, and I just looked at him and I went, "What?" And he said, "You hurt me. You've got MS." And what was the only word that I said the whole appointment? And he said, "So all this silly sports stuff you do, you're going to have to quit that. You're going to have to quit work. You're going to have to go on a whole bunch of drugs. But look, I don't have time for you as a patient. I got enough people with MS already. So go back to your own GP."
Oh my
And with
God.
and with that, he stood up and he put the film back in the envelope and he walked to the door. And I'm still sitting in the chair, kind of going, "What?" And all I could think of was, my life's over as I knew it. I'm going to be incapacitated. That's the only thing that kept running through my head. And he opened the door and he said, "Hurry up. I've got people waiting."
Oh my Lord.
Yeah. As I walked to him, he slammed this envelope into my chest. I can tell you what I wanted to do with the envelope at
Mm.
that time.
Uh-huh.
and then had the audacity to say, see my secretary on the way out. Now, it was probably less than a minute that I was in his office,
Wow.
or less than 2 minutes, but it was no more than 2 minutes. And I remember walking down the hall of this house. It was an old house in Kew that was converted into, medical
Surgery.
rooms.
Yeah.
And I walked past his secretary's office and I walked out the front door. And all I remember is when I got to the door, this secretary yelling, Mrs. Cooke, Mrs. Cooke. And I just walked out. That's the last, I still to this day, it's almost 18 years, April 23rd, it'll be 18 years. And I still to this day don't remember driving home.
Mm.
I know I must have driven because the car was at home when, I got home.
Yeah.
The next thing I remember is sitting on the couch and crying. And I snapped out of it because our puppy was 6 months old and she put her head in my lap and
Oh.
started to whimper because I was so upset. And I just snapped out of it and I said to her, oh, it's all right. It's all right. So, not knowing anything about MS other than the readathon, because funny enough, readathon started in Canada and it was the librarian I had when I was in year 7 who started it.
Right.
So we were the first to ever do the MS readathon, but I didn't know what MS was. And so I had my whole life sorted out by the time my husband came home. And I told him that I was going to give him a divorce and he could have the house we just bought. And I was going to go home to Canada to let my parents look after me because I was going to be incapacitated. And to me, that meant the worst thing possible, unable to function at all on my own. To me, that's what incapacitated meant. And my husband, God bless his soul, he is a real bush boy, and he just looked at me and called me a fucking idiot. And I said, have you not heard what I've said? And he goes, yeah, well, so's he. We don't know anything about this. Let's not jump the gun here. Let's go and find out. Let's find out what we're dealing with. And then he said probably the most loving thing that he's ever said, even aside from our wedding. He said, look, you don't have it, we have it, and we'll deal with whatever happens.
Yeah, very cool.
So yeah, and we're actually this month married 21 years. So we've had some big ups and downs with my health, but yeah, he stuck it out.
Isn't it interesting, amazing partners. I've been married 20 years in January this year, and we hadn't been through anything rough like that early on. But, the blessing of being married to an amazing person who just decides, no matter what, that they're going to sort everything out. They step up, they make you feel supported, they make you feel loved, they make you feel like no matter what happens, everything's going to be okay. And they go from being a normal person to, superhuman almost overnight, just to look after you and care for you. And I reflect on that part of my challenges with my brain, and wow, it's just amazing. It's so great to know that there's people like that will, be straight up front and tell you in no uncertain terms what you are, and to
yeah, exactly.
and to just
But the interesting thing is, I mean, that wasn't even that was just the start. I mean, it got much worse around 2003, and I had to have some pretty major surgery. And unfortunately, with MS, you're not immune from anything else. And I had an ovarian cancer scare as well. And in 2003, my MS kicked in. I ended up having my whole large bowel having to be removed. And then 6 months later, I had a full hysterectomy because of a possibility of ovarian cancer. And after both surgeries, I had multi-resistant staph. So I was extremely sick. And to see a man who would turn green walking into a hospital, sit there and hold my puke bowl and, wipe my face with a cold cloth as I'm just heaving my guts. To think that he was actually able to do that is just incredible,
Yeah.
And then us come out the other side. So yeah, well, you and I are obviously two of the lucky ones, because I know so many people who are living with MS who have lost partners because they just couldn't deal with it. And and the person with MS is fine. Yeah, sure they've got symptoms, but they're fine. They're still living, breathing, walking around. But the person just couldn't handle it.
Yeah,
And so,
I know the same scenario in the stroke community. There's plenty of that going on, and it's a bit sad. But sometimes what happens is, I think, even though it's dramatic, and a lot of the people that are going through a neurological challenge suffer by going through it, and then in the attempt for recovery or getting their life back in some way, shape, or form, the people that I've come across at least have been able to, I don't know, somehow even turn a relationship that went bad, even turn that into a positive. Understanding
yeah.
that, what, that's okay. I can move on and I can find a way to overcome that. That being said, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, and
Exactly.
I would rather
Yeah.
everybody go through our challenges the way that we were supported and loved and cared for.
Yeah, definitely.
My wife also had the pleasure of holding a puke bag while I puked up in hospital, and the same day I didn't know who she actually was. I just had this strange lady at the end of my bed.
Well, at least
Uh,
I knew who Russ was.
yeah, and she was holding the puke bag while I puked up, and yeah, and yeah, she's never let me forget it. So. Uh, I'm really curious because I wake up in the morning, and on a Sunday is my day where I decide that I'm going to ride from Preston, where I live, which is 12 kilometers away from the CBD of Melbourne. I'm going to ride my bike there, have a coffee, do a bit of a walk around, and then ride back. And in total, depending on the route that I take, it can be from 24 to 26 kilometers. And by the end of it, I can't feel my leg anymore. And I have to really be careful when I get off the bike. And you've had so many things that most people would use as an excuse not to ever get up and do anything. What do you feel when you do the exercise that you do? Because we'll talk a little bit about your cycling, but how does your body feel? What's the new normal for you?
Oh, look, because it's MS, it varies day to day. Yeah, I have some symptoms that stay with me all the time. I've got neural pain in my feet, so it's like walking on hot coals all the time. And the more fatigued I get, the worse it gets, or the hotter my core body temperature gets, then that neural pain gets worse. And I remember training in Spain one day, and I thought, oh yeah, everybody else had to do much longer. So, I'm on three wheels, they're on two. So off I go out of the city of Segovia. And like I'm going and going, and I think, oh, geez, I better turn around. And as I turn around, I'm getting hotter and hotter because it's Spain and it's hot. And I get to a point where my feet hurt so badly that every pedal stroke was like stepping on a burning fire,
Mm.
knives going through my feet. And I thought, I'm not going to make it back to the hotel. What do I do now? So, what do? Find the nearest coffee shop with air conditioning. Get off and get in there and have something, and sit for half an hour uh, before I can go again. So, look, and that doesn't happen all the time. Like it doesn't get that bad all the time, but it depends on the day. It depends what I've been doing in the lead up to that day. And I think it's really, it's not something that I've just jumped on a bike overnight and then go out and ride 80K. It's not, it's been baby steps. 2001, I was in a wheelchair full time. So I wasn't walking. I could stand up, but I wasn't walking. And I had a really good rehab doctor that decided to try Botox, which he was using for cerebral palsy. And so I had Botox injected into my leg. And then 6 months of really intensive physio, and then more Botox again. But what I did do is start exercising again. And I got back in the water because in the water you can do things that you can't do on land. And started back swimming and started to build my strength and go to the gym again. And it was baby steps. It was very, very slow. Um, it wasn't until I guess about 2005 where I got invited to a Paralympic talent search day. So I went to that and they said they wanted me to take up the sport of rowing. So I thought, oh, okay. And then rowing built into that as well. So, the constant drive with your legs and whatnot. And it made me stronger, and then switched to cycling in 2011. And I honestly believe that, and oh, I'll tell you, when I started cycling in 2011, 24K would have been huge for me. Like it was a building process.
Mm,
And but exercise is keeping me walking. So you ask, how can you get up every morning?
mm,
Because if I don't, I'll be back in that wheelchair.
mm.
I honestly believe that. So I will get up and I will do something. And, somebody, I was talking at a school not long ago, and one of the kids, it was up in country Victoria, and one of the kids stuck his hand up in the air and he goes, "When are you going to retire?" Here he's 8 years, this 8-year-old kid looking at me going, "Oh God, you're old. Like, when are you going to retire?" And I said, "Well, why should I? If I like what I'm doing and I'm good at what I'm doing and I enjoy it, then I'm going to keep doing it." So, the day that I don't like cycling anymore is the
Mm.
day I'll try something else. Um,
Yeah. Tell me
yeah.
about when you first got on the bike. Was it a two-wheeler or a three-wheeler?
Oh, well, I grew up, with a two-wheeler, and I used to do
Mm,
triathlons and stuff. But I lost, because of my MS, I lost my balance,
right.
and I couldn't ride two wheels anymore. And I remember I had to coach down at rowing one day, so I grabbed a bike just out of the sheds, and I was like Fred Flintstone, where there's feet are on the ground, and that's what propels the car.
Hmm.
And I just could not balance on the two wheels, so I had to lower the seat so I could run my feet on the bike path as
Wow.
I was going up and down the Yarra River trying to talk in a megaphone, coach
At the
these
same time.
rowers. Yeah. So I thought, maybe I should invest in something that's got three wheels instead of two. And yeah, I found a builder here in Melbourne who built me my first trike. It was a 22-kilo steel frame trike,
Wow.
and I just would ride back and forth to rowing training. And yeah, so that was my introduction into cycling. I knew nothing about trike category at the Paralympics. It was strictly to get me from home to the
Mm.
Yarra River and back home.
Yeah. I remember the first time I got back on the bike after surgery and after rehab, and the numbness in the leg. The bike that I got back on was just my old regular bike that I used to ride on.
Yeah.
And I went to pedal around, as you do, and the left foot slips off the pedal and ends up sort of almost scraping the ground. And when the pedal comes back up and scrapes half of your skin off of your shin bone?
Yeah.
I did that about 3 or 4 times just to get back to home because I couldn't feel my leg, and I was just destroying my shin bone the whole time. And I thought, you know what I've got to do? I've got to get a stirrup. I'll get a
Yeah.
stirrup on my left foot and I'll put that one on and then I'll be fine. So I went to the local bike shop, and you wouldn't believe it. The guy there goes, "Oh, this guy just dropped off some old stirrups and I don't want them. Do you want to buy them for $10 and just,
Perfect.
use one?" I said, "Yeah, awesome, perfect." So I put the stirrups on and then I went for a ride. And then when I stopped at the lights, I needed to put my foot down. But I forgot my foot was in the stirrup.
So you fell over.
So I fell over. But I didn't only fall over once, I fell over about 3 or 4 times. And then I thought, well, enough of that. I'll keep the stirrup on, but now I'll take
The
now I'll take
strap,
the strap off. So after 3 attempts at riding the bike, I'm finally at that point where my left leg doesn't fall off, and it's a little bit less dangerous for me to go riding. I'm not going to destroy my car, my
Hey,
shin, and I
you're
won't
not
fall in
a
the
you're not
traffic.
a real cyclist if you don't fall because you forgot to take your foot off. Because when you start with cleats
Yeah,
as well, when you clip your foot in, I don't care who you are, you will always fall sideways at least once.
yeah, okay. I
You
feel
don't
better now.
have to have a problem with your body. And it happens to every person who starts off, who finally decides, okay, I'm going to get clip-in shoes.
Yeah, that's
And they
brilliant.
just get to a light and they forget.
Awesome. I'm so glad that it's just not me. I feel a lot better now.
Oh no, it's just not you. Don't worry about it.
Hey, Carol, were you one of those people that was just that somebody like me hated because you were good at all sports and I really had to struggle to be good at any sport? Because it sounds like you just
Absolutely not.
okay.
If you hand me any kind of ball sport,
Yeah.
basketball, volleyball, baseball, I am shocking.
Okay.
And I think the worst summer of my life, it was one year, mom and dad decided they were going to rent the cottage for a couple weeks, you know.
Mm.
So what did they do? They enrolled us in softball. And even though, you know, we were on teams, I was always stuck out as far out in the field as possible because then I didn't have to catch anything. Until one day somebody hit this pop fly up in the air and I'm standing there with my glove going, it's coming to me. I'm going, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. And it landed right in front of me. I didn't have it. And yeah, so that was the most horrible time of my life spending playing softball. My sister, on the other hand, was a great basketballer, volleyball player. So she got the ball skills and I didn't.
Ah,
So,
well, you've done all right by the looks of things since 2006. There's probably, I don't know, there's probably about 15 or 16 different titles, and there is definitely a gold medal at the London Paralympics. Can you
yeah.
please tell me what is it like to win a gold medal in the
Well,
Paralympics?
you know, the funny thing is I hold that gold medal up when I'm talking to people, whether they be adults or kids, and I ask them how many they think that that's success. And invariably every hand goes up.
Mm.
But for me, the success, I mean, I go back to, you know, as that 9-year-old who wanted to go to the Olympics as a gymnast, and then that 15-year-old who decided that Moscow, I was going to be there to swim. You know, I can go 41 years back. It was a dream to represent my country at the pinnacle. And it took 41 years, 2 countries, and 3 sports, but I actually got there. And to me, that was the success because the Australian paracycling team is probably the toughest team to make.
Mm.
You only get so many spots at a Paralympic Games. So in London, we had 6 female spots and we had 6 male spots out of 13 different categories. So, you know, you either have to be a world champion or definite medal potential to actually make the team. So to make the team, I was just like, wow, that blew my mind. And, you know, the day of the time trial, I actually had to race the men in London because they didn't think that there would be enough females to hold our own race. So they combined us. And it was factored. But you know, the men are so strong. And so I thought, oh, well, I'm just going to go out there and just give it, you know, 120%, as much as I can do. And I did. I just put my head down and off I went. It was only 8 kilometers, but it was like, you know, go as hard and as fast as you can. At this point, I didn't have my 22-kilo steel frame trike, I must say. I graduated to a carbon frame 14-kilo trike.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. And I went about because the time trial you go a minute off, a minute apart. So there was 18 of us. So I think I went about 13th, 12th or 13th. So there was about 6 people behind me. And they weren't reading out when I finished, I'd given it so much that I couldn't even pedal. And thank God I was on a trike because trikes don't fall over. And so I just sat on it, and our physio actually wheeled me into our bay where the team was. And they had to lift me off the trike, and there were still people out on the course. And I got onto a bike on a wind trainer to try and cool down and get the lactic acid out of my legs. And I had no idea where I'd come because they weren't reading out the factored times. They were just reading out the raw times. And so I had no idea what my factored time would be and what place I would be. And the men's and what I thought the women's world champion were still out on the course.
Mm.
It turned out that the female world champion didn't actually race because she had had a crash. This was September. She had had a crash in July and had a head injury, so they wouldn't let her race. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know till afterwards. But so Hans Peter Durst, who is from Germany, he was the men's world champion, and he was still out racing. And I was just like oblivious to it. And our media person from the Australian Paralympic Committee, Jenny Shearer, she just kept saying, she's holding her phone because obviously they were showing, she wasn't telling me, but they were showing the factored times online. Mm. And she's looking at it going, I think you've got this. And as I'm on my wind trainer cooling down, I'm like putting my hand up to her going, don't jinx it. Just don't say it. I don't want to know. I want them to say it over the loudspeaker. And every time she said something, I'd hold my hand up to her going, shut up, don't say anything. And it wasn't until this man walked into our bay and he comes up to me and he sticks his hand out, and it's the head coach of the Great Britain team. And I took his hand, he goes, congratulations. I said, for what? And he goes, you won. And I almost got whiplash turning to look at Jenny, and she goes, oh, for crying out loud, I've been trying to tell you for 10 minutes you won the blood thing, but you wouldn't let me say anything. And I burst into tears. And I'm sure thank God Monty Python wasn't around, because if somebody had been filming it, our head coach came up to me, and he's this huge man, like he's just lovely, and from Queensland, and Peter's got his arms wrapped around me. I've got my head in his shoulder. I'm sobbing. So I'm like, you know, but my legs were still going around on the wind trainer. So I was still pedaling. Wow. He's hugging me and I'm sobbing. And if you take every feeling possible, you know, fear, excitement, joy, sadness, like everything, and wrap it into one, that's what I was feeling. Wow. You can't even describe it because there's just so much that goes through you. And I think the best thing was that my mom and my aunt and my sister were watching. They were there in London from Canada. And, you know, I think of I guess the first thing that went through my head was that all those mornings that my mom would get up at 5 a.m. When I was a kid and drive me to the pool, would drive me to swim meets on weekends, act as a chaperone and come away with the club. You know, it paid off. And it was just as much her medal as it was mine. Like that's how I looked at it. And yeah, it was just when I got down to the medal presentation area, I was a bit concerned actually about how the guys were going to feel being beat by a woman. And Hans Peter Durst, he had come second to me, and then David Stone from Great Britain was third. And I certainly didn't have to worry, because as soon as they saw me, Hans Peter just grabbed me in this big bear hug and almost picked me off my feet, going in a big thick German accent, "You done good." And then, you know, and David Stone was like hugging me going, "Oh, congratulations, that's fantastic." And the one thing that the media asked David Stone was, of course, he's British and we're in London, and the British press grabbed him and said, so how does it feel to be beat by a woman? You know, that was the first question. And true, you know, I give him so much credit, because he just turned to them and said, why do I worry whether it's a male or a female? She had an awesome race. She deserved to win. So that made me feel really good. You know, it was fabulous. But to stand there and have them put that around your neck, it was just like, whoa, this is incredible, you know? So yeah, and it was something I never ever thought would happen, because all those years before, you know, and I did have a chance of going to Beijing in 2008 with rowing, but we were trying to qualify and we missed by 0.8 of a second, you know, wow. Quicker than the snap of your fingers. And we were devastated. So, of course, in 2008, here I thought, wow, all my dreams are coming true. I'm going to get to go to not the Olympics, but the Paralympics, not for Canada, but for Australia, not in swimming, but rowing. Who the hell cares? Let's go. And then in 0.8 of a second, that's ripped away from you. Wow. And I just thought, oh, that's it. I can't do this, you know? And here I was 4 years later, standing there with a gold medal around my neck. So it just kind of seemed surreal. Yeah. And, you know, to think that this is Paralympic year again. And, I think we've got something like, I don't know, 185 days left till the Paralympics
Yeah.
start. And yeah, hopefully be there again, and not have to race the men this time. Yes. And maybe win 2 gold medals. So that's really exciting to think that this could happen for a second time.
I am so amazed to hear your story. Obviously, I am so thankful that you're making the time to be part of this interview. It's just brilliant to hear what it is that you've done, where you've come from, all the stuff that you've had to go through. I know you do a lot of amazing work for some of the local charities, and I also want to talk about the swim event that you've organized. Tell
Yep.
me a little bit about what the swim is about and how it was that it came to be.
Well, back in, it was around 1999, a lady at the MS Society of Victoria, as it was known then, started a scholarship program called the Go for Gold Scholarships. And she had funding, or she raised money the first year, $10,000. And then the second year, she had funding given to her of $10,000. So she gave out 5 $2,000 scholarships for people living with MS just to follow a dream. And the third year, she had no funding. So I was pretty good friends with her, and she said, "Oh, we got to figure out how to raise this money." And we approached some corporates and got turned down. And I said, "Well, you know what? I could probably raise $2,000 for the sports scholarship by doing a swim." So I talked to my club, my swim club at the time, and the president said, "Well, why don't we just invite other people to put teams in, and let's see if, we can do this." And so I contacted the city of Viera, because we swam at the Fitzroy pool, and asked them if they would donate a few lanes for 24 hours and staff it and, do it for free. And they said yes. They said, "Yeah, sure." And so we had, I think we had 10 teams that first year, just by word of mouth and just by, talking to people. And God, we raised $22,000.
Wow.
And so I thought, great, she's got her, my one-off swim is done its job. She's now got 2 years worth plus a bit of advertising money. Perfect. Until I was handing out the awards at the end of that very first swim, and somebody from the back of the room yelled, "When is it next year?" And I just went, "What? Do you know how hard this was to organize?" Because the president of the club at the time had said, "Oh, yeah, I'll help you," when we were talking about it. And then she promptly quit the club. So I roped in some amazing girlfriends who to this day are still doing it with me. And yeah, here we are 16 swims later. We just had the 16th one at the Fitzroy pool March 4th. And the money just kept building and building. And now, with the help of MS, we've expanded to New South Wales and the ACT. And we raise in excess over $1 million a year now just through the swims. And the Fitzroy pool itself, just after this 16th swim, that pool alone has raised over $2.5 million over the 16 swims. And
Wow.
so we're just over, I think it's
7 million.
7.3 million or something now.
Not too
And
shabby.
needless to say, we don't hand out $2,000 scholarships anymore. We actually hand out $3,000 scholarships, and we have in the past handed out 5,000 to people that we thought were just amazing, passionate dreams that they had. And one year we actually gave $10,000 to a woman living with MS. And when I say dreams, people think of these wild, fancy dreams. But the woman who got the 10,000, it was a number of years ago, and she was 54, living in a nursing home with 90-year-olds, basically a quadriplegic. So couldn't even sit up. So she had to be in bed all the time. And her only daughter, now 54, I'm 54 now. So I just kind of shudder at the thought of that being me.
Yeah.
And her only daughter lived in South Australia and was getting married, but there was no way to get her there because she couldn't sit in a car because she couldn't sit up. She couldn't sit on a plane. An air ambulance was just ridiculous. You couldn't do that. So the only way we could get her there was by road ambulance. It was $7,000 to go from country Victoria to South Australia and back.
Wow.
7,000 just for the ambulance. Then she would need, a nurse to go with her. So she'd have to be paid. They needed to hire like a day bed so she could actually be at the wedding. And so we just went, let's just give her 10. And she actually went to her daughter's wedding.
Wow.
And that was her dream. For everybody else, that's just a given. You're just going to go to your daughter's wedding.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I got a picture back from her daughter of this woman in her bed, dressed to the nines, they bought her a new dress, and her daughter and new son-in-law on either side of her, and the smile on her face just said it all. So that was just amazing. So those are the kind of dreams that we make come true. I mean, and they can be anything. So, even going back to school to be retrained because you can't do your job because of your MS anymore.
Yeah.
So, so it's just incredible. But, I think we've now over the 15 years have handed out close to 1,000 scholarships now. But we also help finance the financial assistance program, which is means tested. So people that need somebody to come and put ramps into the house or do some modifications on a bathroom or put air conditioning in because they're heat intolerant. So that the financial assistance program through MS, they actually make sure that they really do need the assistance.
Yeah. That sounds fantastic. Unbelievable that you guys have raised in excess of $7.3 million. So I want to keep talking really, but we're going to have to eventually come to the end of the episode, which is difficult for me to do, but because it's been so amazing. But what I want to ask you is, you're 54. You're going to Rio, hopefully very soon. Your second Olympics. You've had a couple of other challenges. What do you tell somebody who is coming home from a doctor today, has just happened to, fall across this particular interview, and they've been diagnosed with some kind of a neurological disorder, if it's not MS, and the doctor hopefully has been a little bit nicer than your neurologist and given them some news that, they probably could do without. What do you tell somebody like that?
Look, I think, I think back to when I was diagnosed, and allow yourself to go through a grieving period. Funny enough, I look at it now and I think about what that doctor said, that my life as I knew it was over. And he was right. He was right. But he was thinking in a negative way, and I like to think in a positive way, because I honestly would not go back and change the fact that I've been diagnosed with MS, because it's actually made me who I am today. And not that I was a bad person before, but I actually like the person I've become more than the person before. And like I said, not that I was a bad person, but I think I'm more empathetic. I've stopped worrying about climbing that corporate ladder, making that money. I've become philanthropic. It's given me opportunities to do things that I never ever thought I would do. Like last year, I wrote a book. I never would have written a book. I wouldn't have gone to London. I wouldn't have represented Australia in 2 sports. I wouldn't have started the Mega Swim to help all these people. So there's most of the friends I have now, I would never have met. And having a diagnosis is really, really scary. And I don't care what it is. It can be minor compared to anything, like a cancer diagnosis or whatever. But it's still that person's problem. It's still huge in their life. They could have a hangnail and that could be the biggest problem that they've had, but it's still a problem in their life. And I say to people, especially if they've been diagnosed with a neurologist, allow yourself the time to grieve, but don't let that grief take over for too long. If you need to talk to somebody, go and talk to somebody, but keep positive people around you. We are who we hang out with. And if you've been diagnosed with something and it's devastating and you're hanging out with negative people, then you're going to stay devastated. You need to get around positive people. You need to get out of that hole and find a way to live with the diagnosis. Don't let it define who you are. I think that's the big thing that I did. I decided that I wasn't MS. MS didn't define the person I was. I was a person living with MS. And it's so funny because interviews I've done, people say, "Oh, now we're going to talk to sufferer of MS, Carol Cooke." And I always stop them and I say, "I'm sorry, but I'm not a sufferer. I'm a person who lives with MS. My family suffers when I have a relapse. Because they can't do anything. So my family and my friends are the ones who suffer when I'm not well. But I get through it. And I'm the one living with it, not suffering from it." So, that's my main thing is especially with MS, keep exercising. It's just so important, make sure you're eating right. I still drink red wine and I still have my chocolate, all in moderation. But look after your health, because the healthier and fitter that you can be, the better you're going to deal with things, I just look at my neurological condition as something that is not going to kill me. My lifespan is the same as anybody else. So I'm lucky in that, and I'm lucky I have relapsing and remitting MS and I don't have progressive MS. So I'm very lucky, and I, thank God that that's what I was diagnosed and not something else. So I just think I'm very lucky in the fact that I can keep going. And I think, we really have to think that. I had a friend who died a week ago, 33 years old, Sarah Tate. She won a silver medal in London in rowing at the Olympics. And she just passed away from cervical cancer, after a 3-year fight. So I've got nothing to complain about, and it's getting your head around that diagnosis, and it's realizing that, hey, I'm still here. And while I'm still here and I'm still breathing, I've still got a life.
Yeah.
And that disease is not going to define me.
Yeah, beautiful. I get in the stroke community that they talk about stroke survivors, and I feel funny about hearing that as well. I'd rather be somebody who's experienced 3 strokes.
Yeah.
And now I have the story to tell. And the other thing about it is not everyone has my version of the story to tell. So I know it's a lot harder for a lot of people, and I consider myself one of the lucky ones as well.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people doing it really tough with MS. And like I said, I am really lucky. But I still, even if you're struggling with symptoms of MS, just don't let it define who you are.
Yeah.
It was interesting because we just did the bike with MS, and Shane Kelly, Olympic cyclist, rode it in the MS Melbourne Cycle. And what we did is we built this bike that has MS symptoms. And he said, he said to me when he finished, he says, "I actually stopped and didn't finish." He said, "Because it was just all too hard." And I said, well, lucky you could get off the bike. I can't get off my MS. And he says, "You know what?" He said something so profound, and it's exactly what I just said about not letting MS define who you are and getting on with life. He said, "When I stopped thinking about the problems with the bike, I was actually able to ride it a bit better."
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's exactly what I tell people about not letting MS define who you are. Just get on with living. It was just really weird when he said that.
Yeah.
So, it was a great way to end the bike ride that day.
Yeah, that's profound. Carol, tell me, where can people go to find out more about you? Is there some URLs that they could look at?
Yeah, look, I have my own website, and it's just carolcooke.com.au. I sell my book from there as well. I'm self-published, so
what's the book called?
Called Cycle of Life, actually. Yeah, Cycle of Life, gold medal Paralympian, secrets to success.
Nice. Yeah, well done.
So
Congratulations.
It's not an autobiography. It's just about overcoming challenges and change and jumping hurdles and creating a winning mindset. And I just use stories from my life to talk about how I did it.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, thank you so much for spending some time with me on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
No worries, Bill. It's been great chatting.
Yeah. All the best for Rio
Thank you.
this year. I really look forward to hearing your progress and how you go qualifying and then competing?
Well, Channel 7 this year is going to be broadcasting 14 hours a day of Paralympic events for the first time ever on a mainstream channel. And that's across, I mean, obviously they'll have different hours across all their channels. So that'll be fabulous. People at home will be able to watch for a change.
Yeah, well, that is excellent. That is great to hear. And can you just tell us before we actually sign off, Paralympics are what? What actually is it? Because I think people have a different idea of what the Paralympics actually are.
Well, Paralympics came from being parallel to the Olympics. Okay. So it's people with well, almost any type of disability. Um, Other than they used to have intellectual disability that were incorporated. They had a bit of cheating that happened during basketball. So there's only certain sports now who have intellectual disability included. And I think swimming is one of the only ones. But yeah, so it's people with disabilities competing in the same sports that the Olympics have. They're just parallel to the Olympics. That's how Paralympics came to be. We're a couple weeks after the Olympics. So
Fantastic. Thanks for clearing that up. All the best once again. I really thank you for being part of the program. All the best. And we'll talk to you hopefully on the other side of the 2016 Olympic Games with, a couple of gold medals strapped to your...
well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome. All the best, Carol.
Okay, bye.